Hi everybody and welcome back to the TrekCulture Podcast. This is our second episode, which has been really exciting. I am Seán Ferrick, thanks for and of course joining me this week again is the lovely Paul Sutherlin. Paul, how are you getting on?
Very well.
Excellent, good to hear. Crazy question, Paul. Did you watch Star Trek this week?
You know, I think I squeezed it in this week. Let me just think about it for a second. Yes, I watched The Sanctuary. I watched also your ups and downs, so I'm familiar with your take that you thought it was a middling episode. I thought that there was actually a couple of interesting reveals, but, you know, it was fine. I definitely kind of lumped it together with Scavengers as sort of a, you know, they both kind of accomplished the same thing, establishing the Emerald Chain as a threat and continue to kind of give us another look at the rougher side of the Star Trek universe in the 32nd century. I was intrigued by, you know, the sort of power vacuum left by the Federation, picked up by the Emerald Chain. Osira was mustache twirling, but it's great to have I thought it was great to have a female adversary, because those are fairly rare in the Star Trek universe.
Yeah.
But Rin said something that has just had my mind going all week, which is he was telling Tilly that he was taught to essentially be afraid of the Federation, that the Federation were boogeymen to Andorian children, and while Tilly, you know, kind of brushed it off, it really made me wonder if Tilly doesn't know. Tilly's not from the 32nd century. So are the Federation, is Starfleet evil in the 32nd century?
So this is one thing I've been wondering throughout the season, but the first thing, because you just said something interesting there, that like Rin says, Andorian children have been taught. So this was one thing I was wondering, because we know that Earth has left the Federation, we know that Vulcan Nivar has left the Federation, and that of the founding worlds, that left Andor. So I wasn't sure if Andor had left, or if there had just been, say, you know, a faction had joined up with the Emerald Chain. So that's the big ones. I mean, Tellar would of course be the other one.
Right, and based on people of Earth, looks like Tellar is at least aligned with Earth, given that there was a Tellarite member of the Earth Defense Force who boarded Discovery and searched the ship. So Tellar, you know, maybe is aligned with Earth, but not in the Federation either. I didn't see any Tellarites at Federation headquarters. There's Cardassians, there were a bunch of new aliens, and obviously humans and holograms, which, I don't know, I find the hologram thing a little bit suspicious. Maybe it's just me projecting. Haha. But I kept wondering if maybe everyone's a hologram in the Federation, and that might be a little bit of a leap.
Or, I suppose, one thing that Star Trek has set the groundwork for, thanks to the low budgets of earlier seasons, is that, well, we assume these human-looking things are human. We don't know they are. You know, how many species have we encountered in the Star Trek universe that they're but for the grace of some DNA? You know, so...
Yeah, and, you know, I mean, my theory is probably completely BS, given the fact that there are holograms that are being used by Starfleet. But I don't know. I just
yeah, but I suppose not that everyone. But I suppose the best example would be Admiral Vance. I mean, we assume he's human, sure. I haven't seen a birth cert.
Yeah, I mean, he seems human. I guess I'm just alarms, you know, were raised by his seemingly willful ignorance of the burn. You know, the fact that in 120 years Starfleet hasn't had time to investigate what caused the burn. They haven't tried to undo the burn. You know, there's certain not knowing what caused the burn seems like a severe lack of due diligence on the part of Starfleet.
I think, because I think, yeah, there's so much to unpack in Starfleet in general, but I have a question for you. Is it as obvious to you as it is to me that it's not just that he's been so obviously, you know, as you say, ignorant about the burn, or maybe deliberately ignorant about the burn. It's that the crew of the Discovery seem to be taking that at faith.
Well, you know, so this could just be a plot contrivance. It could just be that the writers only want the Discovery to find out, to uncover the truth about the burn. So they're just sort of hand-waving it away and saying, you know, Starfleet's had other things to deal with. That, I can totally accept that. That is likely what's going on. But, you know, suspicious me kind of looks at that and thinks, what are they really up to?
Well, I suppose on suspicious you, right? I think there's a really interesting conversation about Starfleet, about you said the exact words, is Starfleet evil? And so what do we know about it so far? So 32nd century Starfleet, what do we know about it?
Well, we don't know much, and, you know, let's just be clear here, evil is probably a harsh term. We are speculating about the motives of the Federation without actually having been given really any information about their motives so far in the text of the show. But we know that they're significantly diminished. There are still a few familiar members, but for the most part it seems to be a lot of nondescript aliens and humans, but not Earth, not the member worlds. I'm talking about the Federation, not just Starfleet. Although Saru stated, he said specifically that Federation headquarters housed both Starfleet and the Federation civilian government. However, we haven't seen them. We haven't seen Starfleet's civilian managers, and I think that might be a little bit telling.
Bit suspect, maybe.
Yeah, maybe I'm just reading something into everything.
Well, sorry, what I will say is, this is the internet. Read away. This is what we do.
Yes, this is just Reddit incarnate. Now, you know, Star Trek Discovery's had kind of an interesting relationship with the Federation and Starfleet. Right from the get-go, in the pilot episode, Starfleet is depicted as literally a faceless, bureaucracy that punishes Michael Burnham. The finale of the first season of Star Trek Discovery has the crew of Discovery essentially threatening to mutiny against Starfleet themselves. And a lot of fans have taken
umbrage nearly.
Umbrage. Yeah, they've taken a lot of fans have taken exception with the portrayal of Starfleet in both Discovery and in Star Trek Picard. Is this a recurring theme? Is this being carried over into Star Trek Discovery? I was thinking a lot about the fact that, despite the fact that Star Trek is is beloved by everyone across, not everyone, but... So I was thinking that despite the fact that Star Trek has international appeal, it is written by Americans, and it generally reflects, our Americans' perspective on the world, despite whatever era it's produced in, and currently there is a high level of mistrust in our government, and I absolutely see that reflected in the way the Federation and Starfleet are depicted in Star Trek Picard, Star Trek Discovery, not Lower Decks because it's a 90s throwback, but so it simply could just be a cultural thing. But there also might be a story point here.
I think, because I think you're right. I think to not discuss the depiction of Starfleet in Discovery from what we've seen, certainly Star Trek Picard. I mean, there's hours of things we can talk about with Starfleet and Star Trek Picard. And I will hold my hand up and say, I don't have a problem with how Starfleet was depicted in Picard, because I think there was enough information that they dropped in as to why it's certainly different. And you're right. I think Lower Decks, we have this trifecta, right, of depictions really of where the universe, where the franchise is at.
Right.
I love that description you said, that Lower Decks is a 90s throwback, and you're right, it is. It's the carefree days of the Enterprise D, basically.
Right, and Mike McMahan did an interview with Ketwolski in which he said that they really tried to restrict their depiction of the Star Trek universe to the way it would have been depicted in the 90s. So Badgie, for example, is a parody of Clippy, which is a very 90s reference that a lot of people probably wouldn't even remember now. But they didn't, they deliberately chose to keep it restricted in this sort of TNG era of production and TNG era of storytelling. So in Star Trek Picard, the depiction of the Federation was, not the most positive. There were a couple of factors playing that, that sort of marred its perfect image, I suppose, that we had from TNG. But a lot of that also comes from the fact that the show is set from Picard's perspective, and Picard has a low estimation of Starfleet now because he had to retire. He was essentially fired from Starfleet. So whether or not Starfleet is quite so bad as we perceive in Star Trek Picard, I feel like it might be rehabilitated in the future of the series, or it's possible that it just kind of continues on its downward trajectory and ends up where we see it in Discovery Season 3, where, it's just in a terrible state, and, the unthinkables happened in which founding members have decided to just split.
And sticking with the Picard theme as well, so obviously there's a huge Romulan storyline running through Picard, and the Vulcans and the Romulans have seceded from the Federation by the 32nd century of Discovery. So, and my point being that the Romulans, the Federation, and of course the Klingons are the three big, I suppose, empires, for want of a better word. I know the Federation isn't currently an empire, and they've done a hard reset because I think it had kind of gotten stale, but I don't mean that as much of an insult as it sounds. By the time Voyager returned home, because obviously Enterprise was the prequel, by the time Voyager returned home, what exactly did Starfleet do? You described as a bureaucracy.
Yeah, as far as we understand, I guess Star Trek Lower Decks kind of fills in the gaps a little bit, and what do we get from Starfleet, in that series is they are the scolding admirals for the most part. We don't really have an understanding of like a larger political context. We don't know if if there's some kind of other antagonist out there that Starfleet's having to deal with, whether they're, Picard very sketchily, indicated that there was some kind of humanitarian effort, but heavily implied that Starfleet had dropped the ball on that particular effort.
I think, because you're right, I think implied could be replaced with out and out just stated. And there was a fantastic book by Dr. Una McCormack. It's Star Trek Picard, The Last Best Hope. I think we might have talked about this before. And it effectively fills in some of the gaps between the supernova. No, well, it covers the supernova, of course, but it basically tells the story of what they did. And they did a lot, but by doing a lot, it addressed the idea of the Federation does not have infinite resources. Because we were born and bred on, a replicator will fix that, or the Starfleet Corps of Engineers will fix that. And eventually, and there's always been dilithium, and that's interesting to be in Discovery, that as with Picard, the lack of resources is one of the driving points of the plot. And of course, what is Earth going through at the moment? We are going through paralleling events, so it is crossing over into Star Trek for sure, I think.
Right. But, again, this still leaves the question, is Starfleet suspect? Do they have nefarious motives that we have yet to, fully realize in Discovery Season 3? This is sort of a flaw of the serialized mystery box style storytelling that they're currently engaged in. In Star Trek's past, I guess the pre-CBS era, we just knew. We were just told what's going on with Starfleet and the Federation. We were just told what they are, and we accepted that. And if something undermined that knowledge, that was played out in an episode. We had Admiral Pressman, who represented a cabal of Starfleet admirals who were trying to develop a phase cloak against the law. That was an event, that was a development, but that, we didn't have to wait a season or 5, however many seasons, to kind of like suss that out. There's a status quo, and then a story occurs and makes us question that status quo a little bit, and then the next story comes along and we're right back to normal. Here, because we don't know everything that's happening, because the stories are being told in this unfolding mystery, we have to kind of speculate. So, yeah.
No, it is like it's sort of be careful what you wish for a little bit, because I remember watching DS9 as it was coming out and loving that it was serialized. I loved that there was, an ongoing story arc. And that's not to say that I didn't like the way Next Gen was. I really did. I liked that we had Monster of the Week, nearly. And Voyager, it was closer to Next Gen in terms of how it did its story, but it had obviously overall things. Whereas Discovery, from the off, and they had always said it was going to be this. Same with Picard, they said it was going to be this. It's like I think Picard was described as a 10-hour movie, right. Which it is. And Discovery was very heavily serialized as well, and remains to be very heavily serialized. And yet the problem with that is keeping the energy up, because you do need to have your quieter episodes. That's where obviously I came down hard on Scavengers, and the Sanctuary was a bit underwhelming. But I suppose you need to have those as well, because if you had rip-roaring action for every episode of the season, you run the risk of kind of falling into the season 1 of Discovery issue. And again, I'm not hating on season 1 of Discovery, but just there was a lot of style over substance.
Yeah, and I think that there's a little bit of it's a flaw of the storytelling, it's a flaw of pop culture analysis as it, stands right now, that we're constantly looking for canon connections. We want to peel back the layers and see what we can uncover, even if there's nothing there. This could simply be a recurring motif in Star Trek Discovery and Star Trek Picard, that the Federation isn't like the goody two-shoes organization that we are led to believe, and that's it. That it's a little bit more complicated than that. Not nefarious, not evil. Though, it could also be a recurring story thread that is, that's continuing to develop, and that we're just not quite there yet.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose to bring it back to the central question, what do you think? Is Starfleet evil, or is the Starfleet that we have seen in Season 3 of Discovery, are they evil?
Well, they're clearly not evil. Yet. Right? We don't know that, if they are or not. What I will say is that I hope that they're more interesting than how they've been depicted over the last 8 episodes, or 5 episodes, however many episodes the Federation's actually been in. Because I think the willful ignorance, if that's a plot contrivance, that's not that great. And I think it'd just be way more interesting if they did turn out to be a bunch of holograms, or they were up to no good, and Discovery would have to rebuild something other than the Federation. I mean, that rebuilding the Federation, coming from 900 years in the past, and saying, hey, this is the way it used to be, and we want it to be this way again, I don't know if that's very Star Trek-y to me. I know that the Federation is like a symbol of Gene Roddenberry's optimistic future, but I think Gene Roddenberry would also recognize that not everything lasts, society changes, and staying the same for a century or 9 centuries is not the most desirable outcome, of what he, initially started, what he initially wrote about.
There's an episode of DS9 that this reminds me of a lot, this conversation, and it's the 4th season, Ascension, or Accession. I might be pronouncing that wrong, but the wormhole opens and an ancient solar sailing ship arrives at the station carrying the first person to discover the wormhole, who we find out wasn't Sisko at all.
Right, the first emissary.
Bajoran Exactly,
Right.
yeah, this Bajoran poet. And he comes back and says, no, what have you done? You've gone completely off the rails. Let's bring it back now to the way things were in my time. And there's this whole talk about because there was a caste system at the time. And the point of it was like, no, we have moved on from what it was when you left. And if that's where they're going with Discovery, which I think I agree, I think they should show that there has been progress and change. Now, whether it turns out to be bad or good, we'll see as the season goes on. But I don't think it should just go back to the way it was. I think there has to be something new, and there has to be a reason.
Yeah, and like I'm not slamming Star Trek Discovery if they're going to try to reunite the Federation and that's it. Like that, it's as pure as we're better together, and so we're gonna get the band back together. That's a fine storytelling. You know, like that's a fine story. Like I'm totally down with that. If it was more interesting, and that included the Federation being more layered, more gray, still or again, I'm down with that too. You know, like I really don't want to be like, well, I wish that things were even more terrible in the 32nd century. That's definitely not. That's not my opinion.
You monster.
Yeah.
Well, look, it's a really, really interesting topic, and I think it's only something that's going to build each week. To anyone who is listening or watching this right now, we want to hear what you think. We want to hear what you're getting from this season. Please drop your thoughts in the comments below. While you're at it, please like, share, and subscribe. Very much appreciated. For now, before we move on to the next section, Paul, is there anything else that you think that we just want to keep right in the front of our minds going forward?
You know what? I think that now is a good time for news because we'll get that.
Ah, nicely done.
For over 2 centuries, you're listening to the Federation News Network.
So, Seán, big news this week, right? We saw...
Kinda.
No, not big news?
No. Kind of pretty big news.
Yeah, big news, major news. I mean, you know, as
don't leave
major
us in
as it
suspense,
gets.
Paul.
As major as it gets, right? So, Star Trek Discovery has been really cagey with the content that they release in the run-up to their upcoming episodes. The photos that we discussed last week for, you know, last week's episode, as I said, it was just a bunch of people sitting around looking at consoles. This week's photos, just a bunch of people walking around the corridors. However, we do see that Georgiou is arming herself with a new kind of phaser, which says to me that the really beautiful 23rd century phasers that we saw in the first 2 seasons of Discovery are out, and we have a new 32nd century pistol. What did you think? Did you look at that pistol?
I did. It's the one, as you're saying, it's the one from the opening credits. It's the... I like... I mean, how do I say this? I kind of like that it looks like a gun. And I know that's a silly thing to say, because I love the phaser designs, don't get me wrong, I do. But I've always liked the original, I suppose what you call it, a stock, and then the main body.
A pistol.
Yeah, thank you. It's clearly I have so much weaponry experience over here. But I do like that. It does look very kind of slick, and it reminds, I think, of another show that's on television.
Yeah.
Or, well, if there's anything on television anymore.
Are we allowed to say the name of the show? Let's just not. But I actually miss the Dustbuster. You know, Star Trek Picard went back to it's like almost like a Dustbuster pistol hybrid, and then now we're in the 32nd century on Discovery, and it's like just like ray gun again.
I like actually ray gun. That's perfect. Yeah,
but more interesting than that, more interesting than a couple of photos of people standing around some corridors. The Ready Room dropped a clip from the upcoming episode Terra Firma Part 1, in which we saw a temporal agent. We saw Kovic talking to Hugh Culper in sickbay, telling him a little bit about what's afflicting Georgiou, and it turns out that traveling through time and across universes, traveling from the 23rd century and being from the mirror universe, is not good for your cells, and that apparently your cells want some kind of like equilibrium, and time traveling and crossing over throws them all out of whack. So Georgiou is dying, and he uses, as an example, a temporal agent called Yor, who is a Betelgeusian from the motion picture era, like that. What was the name of the Betelgeusian from the first episode of the season? Do you remember?
Oh, I don't.
I already remember. It's Cosmo. His name was Cosmo. Which I think is a great name for a Star Trek character. So maybe future series can have like a Cosmo, not Cosmo Kramer, but Cosmo. Anyway, so Yor, the Betelgeusian that Kovic is telling Hugh about, is a temporal agent from an alternate universe created by a Romulan mining ship. And this is the first overt reference to the Kelvin timeline in all of Star Trek television.
It's pretty serious news. Like, this is... So, obviously, there was a boring reason for a long time as to why there was no... It was because there was rights. I mean, it was kind of split down the middle. The TV universe kind of existed with CBS, and the movie universe still existed with Paramount. I say existed, but you know what I mean. With Paramount. They're now all under one big family again. Like, would you have any kind of personal skin in the game for this one?
Well, just beyond the fact that I really like all three Kelvin timeline movies, even Star Trek Into Darkness, don't at me. Yeah, also, as I said last week, as Sean likes to constantly remind me, I was an extra in Star Trek and Star Trek Into Darkness. So, you know, I kind of feel a little attachment to the Kelvin timeline. I kind of feel like I grew up there in a way. And died there, too, by the way.
That's true. Sorry, commiserations. Yeah. And, and how are you feeling? Because how you've come over from that dimension, and of course that was in the future, so you've time traveled as well. Are you feeling okay?
You know, I'm just waiting for my body to, like, fritz out like Georgiou's did. That was weird. And that actually led me to kind of think about the whole hologram thing again, but no, that's an unrelated affliction, I think.
That's good. that's just a whole other problem she's going through, but okay, that's cool. I think this is huge news. I'm delighted. Now, obviously, we've seen in the pictures as well, which is even visually, it's even more fun, because it's, as you say, Kelvin timeline is confirmed in dialogue in Star Trek Discovery, and the example, the temporal agent Yor, is wearing a TNG Season 1 security operations.
Yeah, so uniform. It's a little...
I'm just delighted.
It's a little unclear based on the dialogue. I believe Kovic says that Yor is from the Kelvin timeline from 2379, but he's a temporal agent disguised in 2360's Prime Universe clothing. That's my read on it anyway. I could be wrong. It may not even matter. It's really silly that we get this excited about a uniform and a Kelvin timeline reference, but this is the kind of people that we are, and,
This is true. Sure, you know this as well. So when Lower Decks was on, you wrote some amazing... I still read these lists of just the Easter eggs, because that's how excited we get about this stuff. If all it was is just an image of him in that uniform and it's never mentioned again, I'm still delighted to have seen that image. You know what I mean?
You know what? What's also interesting about this, and not to belabor the news section here, but the trailer for Terra Firma showed actually an earlier version of the footage of Yor than the version that we got from the Ready Room. And Yor was actually wearing a Voyager Generations era comm badge with his TNG Season 1 uniform that was corrected digitally for the Ready Room clip, which I assume will, be reflected in the episode. Also, though, the episode preview showed a much less colorful version of the footage. It's clear that they hadn't color corrected it yet. And I mentioned last week that I wondered if they were either lighting the sets differently or if they were doing it in post-production, and it would appear that the blue hue of the sets, the blue lighting on Discovery, is actually a product of the color timing that they're applying after the fact in post-production. I thought that was kind of an interesting glimpse into the process.
It is a bit. It's something that I'm really interested in, the behind the scenes of particularly this season, because this season, I might be generalizing, but this season, I think out of nearly, not every, but many seasons of Star Trek before, has had so many difficulties. Of course, the situation that we are all currently living through at the moment, and how that they've overcome those kind of issues. And again, because I still feel like I'm apologizing at this point, I know an awful lot of the graphics work was done from home offices, and it's really, really interesting. But just, I think, so looking forward to the coming episode. Obviously, that's the thing I'm most excited about, but I am delighted that we seem to be getting, I presume we won't get answers to Giorgio in this week's episode, but we're definitely addressing that mystery.
Took long enough. It took long enough, but we are getting there. That's a positive. That's something good. I on your point about the at-home post-production, I think it's either Kurtzman or Michelle Paradise, who's the showrunner, gave an interview before the season began, in which they revealed, one of the two, I don't remember which. They said that some of the post-production work, because they couldn't get the actors back on stage, was wholly CGI, that there would be CGI body doubles this season. I haven't spotted anything yet, but you should definitely take a look or keep your eyes out and, let us know if you see anything, because I'm really interested to see if there's like a freaky CGI Michael Burnham that shows up at some future episode here.
I have a feeling that glitch scene with Giorgio might have been computer generated.
Maybe. Otherwise, I wouldn't put it past Michelle Yeoh's amazing acting to to commit to that kind of body transformation. But so CGI Michael might be coming. CGI anybody might be coming. They might be headed for the airlock too. So I think that's a good time. That's a good time to talk about Cargo Bay 101. All right, so this is only our second podcast, so you may not be familiar with Cargo Bay 101. I'm just going to pose the question to Seán. What's one thing from the entire Star Trek universe that you can live without, that you want to actually take from the franchise, throw it in the airlock, and blow it out into space? Seán, do you have an answer for me?
I do have an answer, and it's one I actually feel quite strongly about.
Is it going to be controversial?
It might be. I think we put Captain Picard in the... No, okay, not that controversial. We will, however, need a big cargo bay for this one.
Okay.
Because we're going to put an entire starship into the cargo bay.
Uh-oh.
I want to put the USS Sao Paulo, or... I know it wasn't Defiant A, but for the sake of this, Defiant A, I want to put that into the cargo bay, and I want to blast it into space.
Do you want to tell us why before I agree with you anyway?
So, the seventh season of DS9 broke an awful lot of barriers for Star Trek, but obviously it wasn't the only depiction of the war. The war had been going for season 6 as well, but what it did do is, for the first time in series, it took the hero ship and destroyed it. So the USS Defiant... Spoiler, by the way, but it's 20 years ago, so come on. The USS Defiant is part of a task force to take back captured territory in Cardassian space. And this is the episode where the new ally of the Dominion, which of course is the Breen, it's when they join the fight against the Federation Alliance. In one of the most devastating battle scenes, which is up there with the aftermath of Wolf 359 in terms of shock, the Defiant, along with all but one, I think, of the rest of the fleet, are destroyed, and it's brutal. It's absolute. There's no getting. I think they get maybe one or two shots off before all power is stripped from the ship, and it is so grim. It is so. It's a proper gut punch. The beautiful Defiant that we've loved so much, you see it burning. So, okay, so you might be going, well then, wouldn't you be delighted to see a new Defiant then? But no, because it feels like less than 5 minutes later, it's grand, there's the new one. And for me, it takes away some of the impact of that loss.
You know, I really don't want this podcast to just be me telling you that you're right, but you're right. It completely undercuts the destruction of the Defiant. though it robs us of a spectacular battle scene in the finale, the series finale. I hate to agree with you in every single one of these, but you're right. And you know what? I'm not just agreeing with you. I'm agreeing with Dr. Bashir, who hated the purple carpet. I hate it too. So let's flush the Sao Paulo / USS Defiant A-ish out the airlock.
Thank you.